Welcome back to the Wounded Warrior Experience, presented by Military Order of the Purple Heart Service Foundation. In this segment, we will be discussing the two unseen wounds that have plagued many veterans of our recent conflicts: post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury. Joining us for this very important segment are former Marine Staff Sergeant Jeremiah Workman, recipient of the Navy Cross for Valor while serving in Operation Iraqi Freedom, and U.S. Navy SEAL veteran Lieutenant Pete Scobell, a veteran of 6 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Thank you both for joining us. Jeremiah, let's start with you. Where did you serve? You were in Fallujah.
Fallujah for the second battle.
The second
Phantom
battle.
Fury.
And just take us through briefly how intense that was. You obviously, you got the Navy Cross for Valor. What happened that day?
Yeah, I had the honor and the privilege to lead a squad of Marines into a house that was full of insurgents. They, at the end of the firefight, which lasted 3 hours, they found 36 dead insurgents inside the house. And as a squad leader, you know, it wasn't quite a whole squad, but I had 8 Marines, a Navy corpsman inside while the fighting was going on. 3 of our Marines we lost inside the house, and the rest of us were wounded. And as you can imagine, for most of the fight, it was 5 of us fighting a couple dozen insurgents in a, you know, showdown at the OK Corral, in your face slugfest.
Do you relive that day?
Yeah, a lot of times I do. And I asked it's hard to believe that I'm here. I was the point man every time we went in the house. I'm going up those stairs, and I don't know how. I mean, I took 3 grenades, and I absorbed them in my legs and my sappies, but I don't know how I'm still here, you know.
How did you feel when you heard that you were going to be given the Navy Cross?
I remember the day I was a drill instructor at Parris Island, and they called me in, and it just brought back, it took me back to that house. I'm like, I lost 3 Marines in that house, and I told their parents I would bring every single one of them home. And I felt like I failed, so it was tough. I struggled with that.
And you've described in the past what was really a downward spiral. What happened?
Yeah. When we got back to Camp Pendleton, it was, you know, I started doing things that were just out of the norm for me, spending money, excessive alcohol, and just doing things that were way out of character for me. And like another panelist said earlier, once you start that downward, you know, once the wheels start coming off the bus, it's hard to keep it on the road. And I just started spiraling out of control.
How did you know you had a problem?
I think I've told this story before. My father-in-law showed up at the airport, LAX, I believe. I pulled around to pick him up. I popped the trunk of my car, and I went to put his suitcase in the trunk, and there were so many liquor bottles and beer cans in the trunk of the car, and I threw his bag in there, and I'm just like punching the trunk down, and it wouldn't shut. And he's standing there and just looking at me like, oh my goodness, or like, we need to talk. You're married to my daughter. But that was the moment, like, I knew something was wrong, but back then, nobody, I don't even know if I knew I don't know if I'd ever heard of PTSD. You came back, you sucked it up, and you prepared for the next deployment. I got orders to drill instructor school. I wasn't gonna say anything that was gonna jeopardize my career. I was gonna go to Parris Island and make Marines. So I kept my mouth shut, but I soon realized the only way I could go to sleep at night is if I drank a case of beer, or, you know, it really gets out of control.
Did you ever face any suicidal tendencies?
Yeah, when I got to Parris Island, and I got relieved as a drill instructor, and that hurt. And they sent me home to Ohio with my bride, and I was at rock bottom. I felt like my career was gone. I felt I was at rock bottom. And I got up one night and I put a gun in my mouth and I took a bunch of medication. And my father-in-law, thank God, he walked into the garage and he found me, and here I am. Thank God.
Thank God.
You know,
and then what did you do to get help?
When I got presented my Navy Cross, I remember standing out there. It was at a recruit graduation. I remember standing out there, and that was the first time I'd heard the citation. I just still struggling with it, but I said, you know what? I'm going to wear this for those Marines. If I can help one person, nobody should hit rock bottom and just stay there and feel the way I do right now. So then my kiddos came along, and that's I gotta be their daddy. I gotta be there. I gotta raise them. I want them to be proud. But really, traveling around the Marine Corps, I'm leaving for South America tomorrow to speak to Marines at the embassy down there. I really enjoy getting out there and being with Marines, because there are thousands of people that are dealing with this.
And you're at the VA right now.
Yeah, I work for the VA. Yeah, it's kind of weird how it all kind of comes together here. But I really, really, like I said, I enjoy getting out there and helping people.
Pete, tell us about your experience. You were Navy SEAL, 6 tours, Iraq, Afghanistan, 17-year veteran. When did you realize you had a problem?
First, I'm just honored to be sitting next to you, brother. I wouldn't normally say that to a Marine, though. But, I was having a fantastic career. I enlisted out of high school, went through SEAL training at 18, spent 4 years in the teams, and then was accepted to Naval Academy, went to Naval Academy, got my commission, came back to the teams. Had been on multiple combat deployments, and I'd checking all the boxes, doing all the things that were right, but then all of a sudden, I just started having serious issues paying attention to anything. I couldn't read emails. I was really just kind of operating on pure instinct at that point. You get so good at your job that you can do the operational part of your job. It's when you start getting into the, remembering things. My wife would put, stuff in the refrigerator and say, hey, there's food for the kids, and she'd come back and she'd be like, why are the kids screaming? Did you feed them? And I'd be like, what are you talking about? But I drove to work one day, and I got to the parking lot, and I looked around, and there was nobody there. It was a Sunday, and I didn't remember driving to work. I didn't know why I was there, didn't know how I got there. At that point, I had 3 herniated discs in my neck, 3 on my back. I had hernia surgeries. I was these headaches I had for about 2 years straight. I'd take about 6 Excedrin a day, and sleeping, no sleep. That's where the issue always comes with sleep, I think, for everybody. And when you talk about post-traumatic stress and traumatic brain injury, there's a comorbidity that the two are very closely linked. And I finally got to the point where I'm failing at home, and I'm blaming work. I'm failing at work. I'm blaming home, and I just walked up to we had a team psychologist. I walked up and knocked on his door and said, hey, I think I got an issue. He was like, well, when did you hit your head? And I was like, well, I've been blown up. I've been, knocked out multiple times. I've been next to hundreds of breaches. I don't know what it is. And he's like, well, I think you're fine. And I got to the point where I resigned. And I just figured that, this was the price. And I was okay with that. I remember sitting in my house and saying, you know what, if at the end of all of this, I'm losing my mind, is pretty much how I felt. Like I can't remember anything. And I thought to myself, well, if I'm losing my mind, and that was a price for all this, then there are guys with no legs, and there are guys with no arms. There's quadriplegics. Like that's nothing. I accept it. I was proud to do it, and I'd do it again. I wouldn't change anything. And I was sitting at I was getting ready to get out, and I had moved my family to Pennsylvania. And I was staying with living with my old buddy, Morgan Luttrell, Marcus's twin brother. And Morgan's my best friend, and I finally just kind of dumped on him. And in a very Morgan way, he just looked at me and said, hey, you got TBI, you should go to NICO. So when I went to the NICO Center, the National Intrepid Center of Excellence, it is It's this amazing facility. It's on Walter Reed National Naval Medical Center, and it was built by the Intrepid Fallen Heroes Fund, and by private money, and it's the only center of excellence in the world for traumatic brain injury and post-traumatic stress. So I showed up there, and it was really my last-ditch effort. And the first day, I walked into a room, and I sat down with every doctor that was going to treat me. And I told my story once, and they said, they looked at me and they said, "Listen, Pete, you're broke, but we can fix you." And at that point, you get a little bit of hope. And I said, "I'll do whatever it takes." And so for the next 4 weeks, I got 93 doctor's appointments. I got 5 MRIs of my brain. I went to everything from acupuncture to yoga, which that's always an interesting thing to do for the first time, especially as a frogman. Yoga, heart math, breathing exercises. They did, they gave me shots in my scalp to take away the headache. I slept for the first time. And when I was there, I sat with Jim Kelly. I said, "What's the problem?" And I would go into his office pretty much all the time and ask him, using analogies, like explain what's happening to me. And I built this brief called The Blast Effect, and the idea was so I could go back and talk to the guys and talk to them in a level like, "Hey, this is what's happened. This is why it happened. These are the effects, and this is how you can get fixed." And so that was the brief, and it really breaks it down into terms that guys like us can understand. And it's amazing the response I got. The first time I gave the brief, I gave it to a squadron of SEALs, and at the end of it was supposed to be a 30-minute brief, and every single guy in the entire room raised their hand and said, "Man, I have all those problems."
What were some of the signs?
Well, the best description I've ever heard of traumatic brain injury is I feel like myself, just it's harder to be myself. Everything I do is a little bit harder. Your brain is like a city, gray matter and white matter. Gray matter are the streets, white matter are the sidewalks. Those are the neurological pathways. If you were to fly over Washington, D.C. on 9/11, you look down and saw the Pentagon, that's a sports concussion. You can identify it. If you flew over on August 23rd, the day we had that earthquake here, you wouldn't see any damage. But when you got down to the streets and sidewalks, there was cracks in the sidewalks, cracks in the Washington Monument. The damage was on an order of magnitude greater that day than it was on 9/11. And passing energy through a region is the same thing as standing in front of shooting a gun. You're passing energy through the cortex of your brain. Your brain's response to that is to send out stem cells to repair those damaged neurological pathways. Well, what they found in NICO is that those stem cells are being killed off by cortisol and adrenaline, which they're produced by chronic stress, chronic pain, and lack of level 3 and 4 sleep. So when you look at a soldier overseas, and you look at the situation they're in, they flip-flop their circadian rhythm. So they're sleeping during the day, they're up going out at night. They're in chronic firefights. They're constantly exposed to blasts, whether that be, law rockets, tanks, AT-4s, breaches, close air support, IEDs if they're getting hit. And then, you have, like I said, stress, pain, and lack of sleep. And so you put them in this, what I call it's the perfect storm. And you start having cognitive deficits, and they add up over time, and that's where the memory issues, the sleep comes in. And so it's really, like I said, it's like comorbid, comorbidity. That they put it all together. NICO's the only place that looks at the problem and treats the problem and not the symptoms. So you don't walk out with a bag of Ambien for sleep, Prozac for depression, and Xanax for anxiety in a crowd. Let's figure out what the problem is. Let's return your body to the state it needs to be in and allow it to heal itself.
Incredible. Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremiah.